Going back
I
to your
lived in
books.
Illinois. I lived outside of Chicago when I was in high school. My
Really?
father got transferred, and then we go up to Wisconsin for vacation, which is
Me too.
there isn't a lot of beautiful scenery in Illinois, but Wisconsin's really pretty. So we
Absolutely.
go up there and stay on one of the lakes or something. It's a nice state.
It sure as hell is, man. I grew up in the northwest burbs of Chicago, and we would go to a place called Watoma, Wisconsin. There was a little tiny, oh, it wasn't really tiny. It was a tiny town, but it was a big lake, and yeah, we in the wintertime go snowmobiling, in the summertime we'd swim in the lake, and it was a really good time. Beautiful, beautiful out there.
There's tons of lakes, and the thing that California residents don't understand is they don't have concrete bottoms. I mean, they're actually the glaciers put them there, not the Army Corps of Engineers. So it's a whole new concept for people out here to understand that water is a natural product some places.
Yeah, sure. I understand that. Well, going back to your books, I noticed that you've, what do you have, 12 different books, I think, that are all series. I saw on Amazon, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, every one of them has made their bestseller list. Is that correct?
They actually have, and there's 8 volumes, not 12, that collect all the stories. And I think there are 57 titles that are individual stories, and some of them have a short second story. And all of the volumes have at least one story that isn't otherwise published. So it comes up to 87 stories in total, which is a lot of stories. None of them are all that long, but you add them up, and they're more in number than there are original Sherlock Holmes Watson stories by Conan Doyle. Wow. There are 56 of those, and there's 39 Jeeves and Wooster stories. So Stinky and Eddie are a talkative pair of characters. Actually, Stinky's talkative. Eddie isn't that talkative. So, and it was an interesting series because the idea of the character just sort of came to me, like in this burst. And you've probably heard J.K. Rowling say how she had this idea that covered the whole arc of the 7 Harry Potter story novels, and it just came to her, and it was kind of a similar thing where on this instant of time I knew about the character and basically the kind of personality he had, and he's such a strong character, like this is what his mother's like, his father, his sister, how he reacts to things, and worked out all these stories. And then it turned out that the different situations that he inhabits open themselves to all kinds of different ideas. So his job is he's a lawyer, and he basically works on wills and trusts, which is boring. So most of the stories aren't about him doing a prenup for a rich client. But his rich clients and his business gives him access to all of these well-to-do people in town, ask him to do things, and he's not going to turn a client down. And if it's billable, he doesn't care if he even knows how to do it. He'll try.
Well, Peter, if I could interject, I got a question for you. Being that you put so much time and energy and effort into developing these characters, and what level of reality are they real to you? Do you envision, or do you think, what would Stinky or Eddie do in these situations? Do you attempt to think like they do? Do you identify with them actually as being real?
Well, I know that they're fictional characters, and there's only one character in the whole thing that's somewhat based on a real person. I can talk about her later. But when I'm writing the story, I have to really think like whoever's speaking. Like the first draft, you just sort of get it down, and then you go through and say, is this the way that this character would speak, and sort of think like them. And I had a couple times where going through a draft, I'd see a word, and I didn't know what the word meant. I'd look it up, and it meant what it was supposed to. So somehow thinking like Stinky, I can dig out these, $5 words that he likes to use that I wouldn't ordinarily use. Right. And the stories cover about a 50-year period in their life. So in my mind, they're very real characters, and they have a lot of backstory and depth to them.
Okay, well,
if you read one story, you won't get the whole
right.
Approach of the person. But you add them all up, and they're consistent. And there's some differences through time as they go through.
Well, you said it spans 50 years. Do you actually envision ever killing them off? Are they going to go away? I mean, and how painful would that be to actually to kill a character that you've created, you've nurtured, you've taken through the years?
Well, that's a really good thing to think about, because each of these 8 volumes is chronological in terms of the characters within the volume, but they overlap. So at the end of volume 1, he's older than he's going to be at the beginning of volume 2. And I think volume 3 ends with, it's the last story chronologically, and Stinky is looking back at his life. He's an old man, and Eddie's died, and he's mad at Eddie for dying, and he's mad at everybody, because he's mad. And his nephew, and he's been a very good uncle for his nephew, who's about to become a grandfather. And so Stinky has this afternoon of reflection, and he decides basically he needs to pick up his racket and get back in the game. He's going to have another great niece or nephew, and who's going to tell him that the kid's great-great-grandmother was a smuggler, or that their ancestor threw up on the Mayflower and etched 1620 into Plymouth Rock, and all of these stories, which probably aren't true in even Stinky's mind, but he has to make sure that they pass them down. He's the uncle that teaches kids how to make sand poopies at the beach. So he really feels that he needs to continue that tradition, and it's sort of, so at the end, he's sort of like Auntie Mame taking, Patrick Dennis's son up the stairs to India, and he doesn't die. And I gave Eddie the nicest possible death. Eddie loves to eat, so
he choked to death.
No,
don't tell me that.
He has a nice lunch with his family, and he's fair. So
Pinky's out lunch, huh?
Just takes a nap after lunch and dies in his sleep. He isn't sick before. So
and then was eaten.
His cousin Kevin, who he's very close to, finds him and calls 911, and that's actually part of what Stinky's mad about, is they took him away before
you
Carol
could see.
or Stinky got back. So if you're going to, die peacefully in your sleep, and your third or fourth best person in the world finds you and looks after it, so that's the way I think most people want to go. You have to go sometime.
I think I want to do like a Sonny Bono, man. He's skiing down the slopes, tree. Just end it like that, man.
He went kind of young though, so
yeah.
But I know you don't want to drag it out. One of my grandmothers died in her sleep in her 90s, and she wasn't even sick the day before. So the thing that was, it's funny, because as old as she was, it was a real surprise, because we didn't have any warning. But then a couple of days later, you think, I don't want her to be sick. I don't want anybody to be miserable, particularly your own grandmother. So she just died in her sleep. So what a good way to go. So I did think of that, and and then in that story, because obviously the characters' parents have all died, because they'd be 100 years old or so by then, and but none of the stories go through anybody being sick or ill. There's one story that, actually, this is probably one of the more moving things in a basically humorous series, is Eddie is handing out toys at a hospital. There's this deal, and somebody was stealing toys to the homeless, but they recover it, and they have this basically a surplus of toys. So Stinky gets the idea that we'll have Officer Eddie go to the children's hospital every month and have a party for the kids and give them toys to deal with the excess. Well, that works out fine, except he becomes a sort of internet celebrity, and it just gets out of control, and he wants to get back
kind of like
to being
Chuck.
a real... Pardon?
Kind of like homeless Chuck, right?
Yeah. He wants to get back to his real job. And there's this one story where it's part of the story where there's a video that this mother has posted, and it's her daughter's last visit with Officer Eddie. And she's a kid with cancer, and she's been in the hospital the whole time, and she's really sick, and she's dying, and she knows it. And her mother won't deal with it, but Officer Eddie does. And afterwards he says he really doesn't know what he's doing. He just listens. He doesn't want to say the wrong thing, so he's more inclined to not say anything at all, which is probably, what do you say to a little girl that's dying? They're not supposed to die. So that's actually very moving. But there had to be something in the story that would get Eddie to move from where he was. And one thing about his character is he's really good if there's an emergency. If something happens, he's going to jump up and do it. He knows what to do. He's, you know, a policeman. He's trained with all the emergency things. He's not good about long term. So if something needs to be done someday, but I don't have to do it today, he's fine with letting it slide. So there had to be something in the story that because of the character.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we are talking with Peter Grant, the author of Stinky and Eddie series, and you can find these books on stinkyandeddy.com and, of course, on Amazon. Peter, I'm really glad that Chuck asked that question to you, because that really gave me some insight, and that these stories are a little bit deeper than just some funny short stories. They really have some meaning that people can identify with, and that's important. That's probably why you've been so successful. You know, you've got some serious character build-up here. You know what I mean? And I can really appreciate that. And I can really appreciate Cousin Kevin as well, because, you know, I'm sure he's a very handsome man. I would beg to differ that he's the most handsome man in the world, not Stinky, or not Eddie. But
well, he's really good looking. Kevin's very good looking.
Oh, thank you. Yes, he is.
But you know, Mr. Peter, you know, I can identify with a lot of your characters. You know, I was raised by my grandfather. I came with a lot of multicultural, and you were talking about, you know, the loss of life. I've seen a few things, but, you know, I had a delightful aunt, my Aunt Virginia. She lived way into the 90s, and she had actually, when she lost her life, she was actually getting ready to get up, and she had actually kind of put her hands on her lap and said, "Okay, where are we going?" Because we were all going to get ready to go out. And I think that was also kind of, I don't want to use the term romantic and death in the same phrase, but I think it was poetic. You know?
Well, listen, guys, way to start off our show with such a positive light for everybody. Just kidding. Yeah. Well, listen, Peter, I don't want to cut it too short, but we are on a bit of a time limit here in the first hour. We're too cheap to buy the pro version of our hosting site here, so yeah, we do run out of a little bit of time. And anyway, again, if you could tell our listening audience, where can they find your books? Is there anywhere besides Amazon and your website, or is there anything else that you'd like to plug about your series?
Well, they're available on Amazon Kindle, and they're free if you're Amazon Prime. And if you type in Peter Grant Stinky, you'll get all of the Stinky ones. And then there's an author. If you get to any of them, you can click on the author page, and they'll have them listed. And the website is stinkyandeddy.com, and there's a link to Amazon. There's a site in iauthor.uk, and which is a really interesting site. It helps you find all kinds of books, and so that will link you to the stories on Amazon or whatever country you're in. And you can find all kinds of interesting books on iAuthor. So that's an interesting site to look at, too.
I noticed also, we've been messaging and talking a lot on Twitter. You're also pretty heavy on Twitter. People should give you a follow. I notice you've got quite a bit of a following on Twitter, and a lot of the things that you tweet are actually quite entertaining, and I enjoy them.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's
I know, all
cool.
of a sudden, all these people, I've been also writing these little Clairhues, the little, they're 4-line biographical poems. So the first line is the person's name, is AABB rhyme scheme. So, for instance, Moby Dick makes students sick, a lengthy tale about a whale.
Cool.
That's a Clairhue.
I'm going to make one of those about...
Somebody compared that to Shakespeare. They said it was the best dick poem since Sonnet 135.
You know, Chuck and Jay are always writing dick poems together. It's kind of scary. But if you could do me a favor, Peter,
it's like a quatrain, right? Isn't also Nostradamus wrote in quatrains, right? Isn't it the same difference as the 4 lines?
Similar.
It's a 4 line. It's a quatrain.
Yeah. So if you have a chance, and I'm not asking you, you know, you don't have to do this, but if you could make a quatrain about homeless Chuck and tweet that out, I would send you some swag.
Chuck, but we try to do better.
He's too smart for that. What do you expect? He's an author, you know. Exactly. Oh man, that's great. Well, listen.
Okay, well, you're not going to toss one off right now because I might regret what I said.
Actually, Kevin just tossed one off a minute ago.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it is a comedy show. Yeah, it's a sausage fest in here, Peter. It's what it is, man. All right, well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is the author Peter Grant, SneakyandEddie.com. Check it out. Go on Amazon, become a Prime member, and get that stuff for free. But listen, we're fans of you, and I really, really thank you for calling in the show tonight. Absolutely. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Hopefully people will get turned on to your books, and maybe some of our fans